Why Carl Jung believes real life starts at 40. At first glance, the statement real life starts at 40 might sound like a cultural cliché, a motivational poster quote, or just a soft comfort for those watching the first half of life slip by. But when Carl Jung said it, he wasn't offering comfort, he was making a radical psychological claim. A truth so profound and unsettling that, if understood deeply, it can change how we view aging, ambition, purpose, and even the structure of our own minds. Jung believed that before the age of 40, most of us are not truly living, we are performing, we are building, we are becoming, but we are not yet being. We are assembling the mask, and only after 40, perhaps, are we ready to take it off. Let's start with the most essential idea: the human psyche unfolds in stages. According to Jung, the first half of life is dominated by the ego, the part of us that wants to succeed, to be seen, to be admired. We build careers, create families, chase dreams, and construct identities. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's necessary. The first half of life is about establishing the container, the external shell we live in. But what happens when that container is built? What happens when you've achieved what you were told to achieve, yet feel a strange emptiness growing inside? That's the moment Jung pointed to. That's where real life begins, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because it becomes real. Before 40, we often live according to inherited scripts, our parents' expectations, societal roles, unconscious desires shaped by childhood. We're driven by what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the world. The persona is useful, it helps us function. But it's not your soul. And if you mistake the persona for the self, you'll spend decades chasing things that were never truly yours. So here's a question worth asking: how much of your life is truly yours? How many of your goals are self-authored versus socially inherited? That's a question most people don't have the courage to ask until midlife forces them to.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
And that's what makes 40 such a powerful threshold. It isn't just about the number, it's about the psychological shift. Around this time, many people begin to experience what Jung called the midlife crisis. But he didn't see this as a breakdown. He saw it as a breakthrough, an initiation, a sacred invitation to begin the second half of life, not by building more, but by going within. This is the moment where the ego must step back and a deeper self, what Jung called the self, with a capital S, begins to emerge. The self is not about performance. It's about authenticity. It's not about success in the world, but alignment with the soul. Think of the first half of life as the construction of a house. You lay the foundation, raise the walls, install the furniture. And then around 40 you walk inside. You look around and you ask, what kind of life do I want to live inside this structure I've built? What kind of conversations do I want to have? What values do I want to live by? What legacy do I want to leave behind? These questions don't often arise in our 20s or 30s, not because we're not capable of asking them, but because we're too busy surviving, climbing, proving. A real life, Jung believed, begins when we stop performing and start reflecting. But reflection is dangerous. It destabilizes. It shows you where you've lied to yourself. It reveals the cracks in the identity you spent decades polishing. And yet, paradoxically, this is where healing begins. Because you can't integrate what you haven't confronted. And you can't live authentically until you've stripped away the false self. That's the sacred work of the second half of life. The work that begins often painfully after 40. And here's the twist. Many people resist this transition. They double down on the ego. They chase youth, chase money, chase validation because they fear the silence that comes with going inward. But the silence is where the soul speaks. Jung warned that if you ignore this call to inner life, the unconscious will find another way to reach you through depression, anxiety, addiction, or a gnawing sense that your life, no matter how successful, feels hollow. So what if the crisis is actually a calling? What if the discomfort you feel at midlife isn't a problem to be solved, but a message to be interpreted? Not something to run from, but something to listen to. Jung would say, listen carefully, because this is when the archetypes start to shift. The hero gives way to the sage. The warrior gives way to the healer. The outer world becomes less important, and the inner world becomes the new terrain of adventure. So let me ask you something, and don't answer too quickly. What part of you is trying to emerge that you've been too afraid to meet? What voice in your soul have you silenced because you were too busy being who the world wanted you to be? The reason real life starts at 40 is because that's when you finally have the chance and the courage to live your life, not someone else's version of it. The ego's surrender, why success is not enough for the soul. We spend the first half of life chasing things, titles, relationships, status, and recognition, because we believe that if we just accumulate enough external success, internal peace will follow. But Carl Jung, in his quiet, revolutionary way, warned us, the ego is a master of illusion. It promises fulfillment through achievement, but often delivers exhaustion. And when the applause fades, when the dust settles, when you finally reach that peak you've spent decades climbing, you might find something unexpected at the summit, an emptiness that success cannot fill. Jung believed that the ego is necessary, but it was never meant to be in charge forever. It's the builder of identity, the outer architect of our lives. But the soul is the inhabitant, and a house built by the ego, without input from the soul, will always feel hollow. That's why so many people in their 40s and 50s, even those who seem to have it all, experience a strange disorientation. Their life looks perfect from the outside, but inside there's a quiet ache. A question that won't go away: is this it? That question isn't a sign of failure. It's the beginning of awakening. The ego thrives on separation. It defines itself by comparison, by differentiation, by control. But the soul seeks wholeness. It wants to integrate, to unify, to heal. And when the ego has run its course, when it has built enough, proved enough, conquered enough, the soul begins to stir. If the ego doesn't step aside willingly, life will find ways to humble it. Be a health scare, a divorce, a career collapse, a sudden, inexplicable sadness that no amount of travel, money, or attention can fix. These are not punishments, they are invitations. The universe, Jung might say, is asking you to surrender not in defeat, but in transformation. You see, the ego wants answers. The soul wants questions. The ego wants control. The soul craves mystery. And the moment you begin to shift from one to the other, your life no longer revolves around doing more, it starts to revolve around becoming more. This is the transition Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society rewarded, but who you were born to be. And to get there, the ego must loosen its grip. Let me ask you something that might hit hard. What would you have to let go of to be truly free? What identity, what version of success, what outdated dream are you still clinging to because you don't know who you'd be without it? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Because the second half of life is not about accumulation, it's about distillation. It's about getting down to the essence of who you are and letting go of everything that distracts from that truth. This is where the soul begins to speak. Not in the language of goals, but in the language of meaning. It whispers things like purpose, connection, service, love. These are not the ego's metrics. These are the soul's. And when you finally begin to live by them, something extraordinary happens. Your life becomes quieter, but richer. Smaller, but deeper. You start to experience joy not as a fleeting high, but as a sustained presence. You stop chasing moments and start inhabiting them. Remember this, the ego wants to be seen. The soul wants to see. The ego wants to be right. The soul wants to understand. The ego wants to win. The soul wants to grow. And at some point, you will have to choose which master you serve. You can continue chasing the ego's endless mirages, or you can turn inward, face the silence, and begin the sacred work of becoming whole. The second birth, how midlife awakens the deep self. There is a profound moment in a person's life when the old ways stop working. Not just practically, but existentially. The career that once lit you up now feels empty. The relationships that defined you no longer nourish you. The goals you once chased with fire now seem strangely irrelevant. And it's not that something is wrong, it's that something deeper is waking up. Carl Jung called this the beginning of the second birth. Not a birth of body, but of soul. A re-emergence of the authentic self that has been waiting, often quietly, beneath the surface of ambition, identity, and performance. Midlife is not the beginning of decline, it is the beginning of depth. In our youth, we are taught to look outward, pindis. We are trained to conquer the world, to earn our place, to gain approval. And so we build careers, families, reputations. We climb ladders, chase titles, seek meaning through external validation. But eventually, we arrive at a strange and silent place. A place where all our accomplishments no longer answer the deeper questions. Who am I beneath all this? What is my purpose when there is nothing left to prove? Why do I feel hollow even though I've done everything right? These aren't signs of failure. They are signs that the first self, the ego-constructed self, is beginning to dissolve, making space for something more real. Jung described this as the individuation process, but make no mistake, it is nothing short of a spiritual rebirth. It is raw. It is humbling. It often begins in darkness. You feel lost, but not in the way a child is lost. You are lost in the way a butterfly is lost when it leaves the cocoon. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. This in-between space, this liminal threshold, is the crucible of transformation. It's where the soul does its deepest work. And yet, many resist this process. But why? Because becoming who you truly are means letting go of who you pretended to be. It means facing the wounds you buried, the truths you avoided, the parts of yourself you judged or abandoned. But here's the paradox. Only by confronting those shadows can you retrieve the light hidden within them. The second birth is not about becoming someone new, it's about remembering who you've always been beneath the noise. So ask yourself, what parts of me have I silenced in order to belong? What forgotten dreams, what buried talents, what sacred longings have I pushed into the corners of my life because they didn't fit the script? The second birth invites you to reclaim them, to bring them into the light, to live not from obligation, but from authenticity, not from fear, but from freedom. This is the great invitation of midlife, to stop chasing the life you were told to live and start listening for the life that is uniquely yours. And this listening is not passive. It is active. It takes courage to sit in silence. It takes strength to unearth buried truths. It takes radical honesty to admit that, despite your achievements, you are still searching. But that search is sacred. It is not a detour. It is the path. The deeper self that begins to awaken in midlife is not concerned with status or image. It speaks a different language, the language of soul. It asks deeper questions. It craves deeper answers. And it won't let you settle for half a life. It wants all of you, not just the polished parts, not just the parts that make sense to others, but the whole truth of who you are. That's what it means to be reborn, not to start over, but to start deeper. Wholeness over happiness. Why midlife seeks meaning, not escape. We enter the second half of life believing we must chase happiness. But Carl Jung urged us to aim for something far more enduring: wholeness. Happiness is fleeting, circumstantial, often dependent on things going our way. But wholeness is different. Wholeness is deep. It's not about feeling good all the time, it's about being real all the time. It's not about escaping pain, it's about integrating it. And the truth is, by midlife, we've all gathered a certain weight. We've lived through heartbreak, disappointment, disillusionment. We've won and lost. And there comes a point where the soul no longer wants to escape these experiences. It wants to understand them. Jung believed that the goal of life is not to remain in a constant state of pleasure or success, but to become whole, to bring together the fragmented parts of ourselves, even the ones we've been taught to hide. The sadness, the fear, the rage, the tenderness, the longing, all of it. And the moment we stop trying to be happy in a superficial way and choose to be honest with ourselves, something profound shifts. We stop chasing life as a performance, and we begin to live it as a practice of truth. This is the sacred work of midlife, not to escape into fantasy, but to descend into reality and find meaning there. And meaning doesn't always feel good, but it always feels real. It's what makes suffering bearable. It's what allows us to walk through grief with grace. It's what turns pain into wisdom. Jung didn't promise that life would become easier after 40. He promised it would become more real. And in that realness, we discover a kind of fulfillment that the ego could never touch. A fulfillment that comes not from what we do, but from who we become while doing it. So what does this look like, practically? It means that we begin to live with intention. We stop living on autopilot. We question our routines, our roles, our relationships. We ask ourselves, is this aligned with who I'm becoming? Or is this a relic of who I used to be? We begin to say no to things that drain us, and yes to things that nourish us, even if they don't make sense to others. We become less concerned with being understood and more devoted to understanding ourselves. And in this shift, we stop running from life's complexity and begin to embrace it. The irony is that when we stop chasing happiness and start living for wholeness, a quieter, deeper kind of happiness emerges. Not the manic high of achievement, but the steady warmth of alignment, not the thrill of applause, but the peace of self-respect, not the sugar rush of validation, but the nourishment of purpose. And this kind of joy is unshakable because it isn't built on what the world gives you. It's built on what you've discovered within yourself. So let me offer you a final question, one that echoes through Jung's work and through every soul brave enough to face the truth. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to be happy and started trying to be whole? What would you do differently? What would you stop pretending? What would you finally allow yourself to feel? That's the adventure that begins at 40. Not the adventure of climbing higher, but of digging deeper. Not the pursuit of perfection, but the embrace of paradox. Not the escape from suffering, but the transformation of it. Jung's wisdom reminds us that real life doesn't begin when everything is figured out. It begins when we stop lying to ourselves, when we face the mirror without the mask, when we stop chasing the light and learn to find it in the dark, because that's where the soul lives, in the questions, in the contradictions, and in the quiet. And if you dare to go there, you won't just find happiness, you'll find yourself. And that, Jung believed, is when life truly begins.